I spent 41 years with my hands inside pianos, and I believed by the end of it that I understood everything an instrument could say. I tuned grands for concert halls and uprights for church basements, and I thought I had heard every voice a piano owns. Then, on a cold March evening in Aldermere Hall, a 12-year-old girl in a gray cardigan sat down at a Steinway she had no business, in anyone's eyes but mine, being allowed to touch, and showed me I had been wrong my whole life. Her name was Wren. She came to me 7 years before that night, the spring after my wife passed, when a caseworker from the county knocked on my door with a 5-year-old girl holding a small tin box and almost nothing else. I was 61, retired, rattling around a house that had gone too quiet, and I said yes before I'd properly thought it through, which is, I've come to believe, the only way anyone ever says yes to something that actually matters. In that tin box was a hairbrush, a photograph too faded to make out, and a single page of sheet music, torn along one edge, with no title and no composer's name written anywhere on it. Just 4 lines of melody set down by hand, in pencil, the notes a little uneven, as though written quickly or written by someone tired. I couldn't read music well enough to play it properly, but I kept an old upright in the front room out of habit, and most evenings that first year I'd sit at it and pick the melody out note by note until I had it. Wren liked it. She liked it so much that for a long while it was the only thing that got her to sleep. I'd hum it, off-key, sitting on the edge of her bed, and somewhere around the second time through she'd be gone. By the time she was 7, she'd stopped wanting me to hum it and started wanting to play it herself, on that same upright, picking it out with one finger, and then 2, until I sent her down to the community center on Tuesday afternoons, where a retired schoolteacher named Iris Bennett gave lessons for whatever families could spare. Within a year, Mrs. Bennett was telephoning me at odd hours to tell me things I didn't fully understand about ears, about hands, about a kind of listening that can't be taught, only recognized. Within 5 years, Wren was the only student from our side of the county to qualify for the Regional Youth Piano Championship final, on what the program politely called a community scholarship. I knew what that phrase meant to the people reading it, so I suspect did Wren. Aldermere Hall on the night of the final was not built for people like us. Red velvet, gilt moldings, a chandelier the size of a small car, and rows of families in good coats who all seemed to know one another, conservatory families, the kind with portraits of grandparents holding violins in the front hall. Wren sat beside me in the same gray cardigan she wore to school, her competition number pinned to it with a safety pin, her hands folded in her lap, very still. I had tuned that Steinway myself twice for previous competitions, and I remember thinking that at least the instrument, whatever else happened in that room, didn't care where a person came from. We had sat through 5 other finalists by then. A boy who played a Mozart sonata with the polish of someone who had been drilled since the cradle. A girl in a sapphire blue dress who handled a Chopin etude with a confidence that drew warm, easy applause. 2 more whose names I've since forgotten. And a tall, serious young man whose Brahms intermezzo was lovely enough that I worried quietly for Wren's chances. Each of them had walked to the piano in clothes that matched the room, dark suits, careful dresses, the kind of polish that says, before a single note is played, I belong here. Each of them had been greeted with a small, encouraging murmur before they began. When Wren's name was called, the murmur was thinner and shorter, and I felt it land on the back of my neck like a draft from an open door. The head of the adjudicating panel was a man named Maestro Corwin Vale, a name that carried weight in those circles, the sort of man whose written remarks could end a young career before it properly began. He had a way of reading a printed program and then looking up slowly, as though confirming a suspicion he'd already formed. When Wren's name was called, he didn't simply announce her piece. He leaned toward the microphone, offered the thin, careful smile I'd later see described in the newspaper as famously exacting, and explained that the panel had decided, in fairness to the other finalists, that the scholarship entrant would perform a substitute work. Liszt's La Campanella chosen, he said, to give us all a clearer picture of what we're dealing with. A ripple moved through the hall. Somewhere behind me, a woman laughed softly, the particular laugh of someone who assumes no one important can hear her. La Campanella was not a piece for a 12-year-old from a community center. It was barely a piece for most working adults. Vale knew that. Everyone in that room old enough to know anything about pianos knew it. I looked at Wren. I expected tears or that brittle stillness children get just before they cry. Instead, she studied the stage the way she studied a difficult page of arithmetic, turned to me, and asked very quietly, "Is that the hard one?" I told her it was. She nodded, as if filing the information away for later, smoothed her cardigan with both hands, stood, and walked down the aisle alone, small, gray, unhurried, toward a piano that gleamed like black water under the chandelier, while 300 people in evening dress watched her go in the particular kind of silence that isn't silence at all, but a held breath waiting to become something else. She climbed onto the bench. They'd had to raise it twice for her, adjusted nothing, and sat with her hands in her lap a moment longer than was comfortable to watch. Then she lifted her hands, and the first note arrived. A single high B-flat, struck and released so cleanly that it seemed to hang in the air beneath the chandelier before it faded, like a bell rung once in an empty church. Then the second note. Then the run of impossible little leaps that make that piece a kind of trap for the hands, the bright, glittering, bell-like figure climbing, repeating, never quite settling. And I felt my own hands go cold in my lap, because I knew, better than almost anyone in that hall, exactly how easily those leaps go wrong, and exactly how unforgiving the silence is when they do. They didn't go wrong. Note after impossible note, her hands found the keys the way water finds the lowest point, not forced, not hurried, simply inevitable. The laughter behind me had stopped within the first 4 bars. By the 8th, the woman who'd laughed was leaning forward with the rest of the hall, the way people lean toward a fire on a cold night, without deciding to. Wren's face hadn't changed at all. She wasn't performing for any of them. I don't believe, in that moment, she remembered they were there. And then, perhaps 2 minutes in, the piece does something most listeners don't expect. After all that glitter and leap, it drops, suddenly, into something slower. A quieter melody, almost tender, threaded beneath the same bell-like figure, like a voice speaking calmly in the middle of a storm. I had heard that piece exactly twice before in my life, both times on a scratchy recording Mrs. Bennet had lent me, and both times I'd been too anxious about Wren's chances to truly listen. I was listening now, and somewhere in the second bar of that quiet melody, my chest went tight because I knew it. I had known it for 7 years. It was the tune from the torn page in the tin box. It was the tune I had hummed off-key on the edge of a child's bed, badly, 100 nights running, never once wondering where it came from, only that it worked. I sat very still in my red velvet seat while Wren's small hands found that melody, found it perfectly, found it the way you find your own front door in the dark, without looking, and I understood, all at once and far too late, what that torn page had actually been. Not a scrap, not a curiosity. A few bars copied out by hand by someone who knew this piece, knew it well enough to write down its quiet heart from memory, the part worth keeping when nothing else could be carried. Someone who had loved this music enough to want a small girl to fall asleep inside it, even from a great distance, even without ever being able to say so aloud. I had spent 7 years assuming Wren's gift had come from nowhere, a fluke, a stroke of luck, the kind of thing people are quick to call a natural. Sitting in that hall, I understood, finally, that it hadn't come from nowhere at all. It had been waiting in her hand since before I ever met her, carried across in 4 lines of pencil, and a lullaby I'd been humming wrong for years without once losing the part of it that mattered. The quiet melody didn't last. It couldn't. That isn't how the piece works, and Wren seemed to know it, the way she seemed to know everything about that music that mattered. The glitter returned, faster now, the leaps wider, the bell figure climbing into registers that made the chandelier itself seem to ring in sympathy, and I watched a 12-year-old in a gray cardigan disappear entirely into something that, by any reasonable measure, should have been beyond her, and wasn't. The final pages of that piece are a kind of controlled avalanche, octave leaps crashing down the keyboard one after another, faster, until the whole instrument seems to be falling and somehow landing on its feet every single time. Wren played the avalanche. She didn't survive it. She conducted it. And when the last chord landed, both hands at once, full and final and absolutely certain, the sound filled every gilded inch of that hall and then simply stopped, the way a held breath stops when you finally let it go. For one full second, I have counted it in memory more times than I can say, Aldermere Hall made no sound at all. 300 people in evening dress, holding programs, holding their breath. Then someone near the front stood, and then everyone did all at once, the way a field of wheat moves when the wind finally reaches it. And the sound that followed wasn't polite applause. It was closer to a wave breaking. Again and again, people calling out, several openly weeping. An old woman too rose ahead of me with both hands pressed to her mouth. Wren sat at the piano a moment, blinking, as if she had just woken up somewhere unfamiliar. Then she looked out at all of it, really looked, for the first time all evening, and I saw, even from where I sat, the exact moment she understood what she had done. Maestro Corwin Vale did not look like a man whose joke had landed the way he'd intended. He sat with his pen still in his hand, writing nothing, his famous careful smile entirely gone, replaced by something I can only call a kind of stillness, a man recalculating in real time everything he had believed an hour earlier. When the applause finally allowed it, he rose with the rest of the panel, and he was the last of them still clapping after the others had stopped. Afterward in the corridor he found me, really, since Wren had gone quiet and small again, overwhelmed by all of it, and he did not apologize exactly. He said only, I chose that piece to find her limits. Then he looked toward Wren and added more quietly, I don't believe she has any. I am sorry it took me until tonight to look properly. It was not a grand speech. It didn't need to be. A man like that, admitting in front of his own panel that he had been wrong, was its own kind of standing ovation. Later in the car, Wren asked me, the way children ask the questions that matter most, sideways, looking out the window, whether I had liked it. I told her it was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard in my life, which was true, and then I told her about the tin box, and the torn page, and 7 years of humming a tune I had never understood badly on the edge of her bed. I told her that the quiet part in the middle, the part that wasn't supposed to be there, the part that felt like a voice speaking calmly inside a storm, was the very same tune. That someone, long before either of us, had loved that music enough to want her to grow up with it already inside her, even from a great distance, even without ever being able to say so. Wren was quiet for a long time. Then she said, so I already knew it, before I could even play. I told her yes. I think that's exactly right. I have tuned a great many pianos since that night, and I expect to tune a few more before I'm finished. But I have never once sat down at one again without thinking of a torn page, a badly hummed lullaby, and a girl in a gray cardigan who turned out, all along, to have been carrying someone else's voice home.